Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Reynoso Aguilar, and this is Systems Theory for PAD 500. I just wanted to give us a quick orientation of where systems theory fits within our course. You'll find it in our textbook under Chapter 4 for organizational theory. And there are two schools of thought on organizational theory. The first is the structural or traditional theories, which include the classic and bureaucratic theories. And then there are the modern approaches or challenges to those traditional theories. So the traditional theories are hierarchical in nature, and systems theory was developed as an alternative to hierarchical theories, and it helps focus on boundaries and purpose, which are two important elements of the classical and bureaucratic theories. Let's define systems theory. First of all, a system is the product of its interrelated and interdependent parts and represents a complex set of interrelationships rather than a chain of linear cause-effect relationships. So there, in this definition of a system, you can see that systems theory is a departure from the traditional hierarchical approaches. Our textbook defines the systems theory by how it sees organizational work as a set of related parts, and it seeks to generalize about all organizations, both public and private, large and small. And he goes on to say that systems theory is simple to describe but hard to apply because systems theory focuses on feedback. It states that organizations learn from feedback and improve over time. There are two types of systems. There are closed systems and open systems. A closed system is a far less common system to encounter. It compares an organization with a machine that is isolated from its environment and therefore not affected by changes to its environment. It's pretty difficult to come up with like an actual perfect example of a closed system, but if you think of a pressure cooker, once it's connected to electricity and the lid is sealed shut, the machine performs regardless of changes to the environment. So it's not a perfect example because you still have to supply electrical from outside the system, but it's as perfect as we can get for now. I think our textbook uses the example of a climate control system in a building, and that you can set the thermostat for climate control and program it in any way you want for a certain temperature. Some of them have humidity adjustments, but you can program it for certain temperatures at certain times of day, etc. But regardless of who's in the building or who's outside of the building, once you've set that system for a program, no matter what the weather is outside or anything that's going on in its environment, that system will run at the setting you programmed it for. The other type, more common system setup, is an open system. And this open systems concept compares an organization with a biological organism, which is constantly interacting with its environment. So if you think of a biological organism, a tulip plant takes sunlight and water from its environment to fuel the biological process of photosynthesis to generate its food. The tulip is affected by the temperature and the amount of rainfall, the amount of sunlight, and whether there are pollinators that fertilize it or animals that may eat the plant. Um, the tulip is constantly interacting with its environment to do this process. Um, and our textbook uses the example for an open system of the human body and how it maintains its temperature. Once again, to maintain its temperature, the human body is constantly interacting with its environment. It's an open system. A few systems theory is based on a few essential elements. So here are a few terms that we need to become familiar with. They are inputs, throughputs, and outputs. Inputs are the resources that organizations use in producing outputs. So that may include raw materials, also, human interaction, human labor, human knowledge, special skills. And then there are throughputs, which is the process of transforming inputs into outputs, which we'll get to in just a moment. And then outputs are the goods and services that an organization produces. So here is an actual photo of the diagram provided in our textbook on systems theory. And again, here is a pretty clear picture. You can see that systems theory was developed as an alternative to hierarchical theories. So just at a first glance, you can see that this systems theory concept is not a linear process. It's actually based on a feedback loop, which is an element that connects, feedback is an element that connects the outputs an organization produces to its inputs. So when I look at this diagram, I think of a factory. I think that's a really great example to help us understand systems theory, and just consider this diagram and imagine a factory. So let's imagine our factory is a food processing plant. So we start in the top left corner where it says inputs here, and we think about the raw materials to manufacture food. Let's just use lettuce as an example. So we're going to receive on the receiving end of our factory. These trucks are coming from all different places to deliver skids full of heads of lettuce, straight off the farm, heads of lettuce in their entire heads of lettuce. And so they will be received in our factory. People will, drive forklifts, deliver these heads of lettuce to the processing lines. And then we begin our throughput process where people will break down the lettuce, discard the parts that we can't use. They'll wash the lettuce, they'll put it onto production lines, maybe conveyor belt system to get everything cleaned up and start shredding the lettuce. Maybe our customer wants shredded lettuce in certain dimensions, delivered in certain portions. And so that's our throughput process. We have the raw lettuce being broken down into our saleable product. And at the end of that breakdown process, the lettuce is bagged into specific portions and ready for shipping. So that's our output. The lettuce is going to be in its bags within shipping boxes, ready to go on trucks on the shipping side of the building and out to our customer. And let's say our customer in this situation is Taco Bell. Taco Bell is going to buy lettuce on an industrial scale, truckloads of lettuce to go to different restaurants. And so Taco Bell is going to receive the shredded lettuce product and they're going to serve it to their customers. And so in using that product, Taco Bell is going to develop some feedback. They're going to decide whether the lettuce is working well for them, if it's in an ideal setup for them and their clients, or if there's something they'd like to see improved. Maybe they notice that the lettuce wilts too quickly, or that it's arriving too wet, or perhaps they want to change the dimensions of the lettuce, or maybe they prefer a different species of lettuce because it might be hardier and hold up better to this process. Any of those things might be feedback about what's working well or what might need improvement, and that information can go back to our factory and they can use that information to improve their inputs. Maybe they're going to change the species of lettuce that they order for Taco Bell products, or maybe they're going to change their process, or maybe they can arrange for a better time for expedited shipping so that they receive the raw lettuce quicker when it comes out of the field so that they have more time to work with it before it begins to decay. So they can do any of those, any number of things from the feedback to improve their process and go through the process again with this new information and a new approach. And so they're constantly improving their inputs to outputs through feedback. And so another example, when I see this diagram, you may consider software. So if you're in a position where you are generating sales software, generating sales presentations. So there's untold numbers of software where you can input several data points and the software will run complex calculations and system throughput process and generate beautiful, well-crafted outputs for you to present to your client. So then you would present this beautiful presentation to your client, and they may learn from that process. That the client may decide, oh, okay, now that I see the output, there's some questions I have, or maybe I want to adjust something to generate a more favorable output for us. So they'll give you that feedback of different numbers to put in from what you originally used. Then you can put it through the process again, do your throughput in the software, and review the new output with the client, and you can continue on. And you may have to adjust it several times and generate a new output to present several times. But that's another common process that you might see that clearly illustrates systems theory. Boundaries and purpose. Systems theory helps focus on two important elements of classical and bureaucratic theories. Those are system boundaries, which are defined by agency jurisdictions, which this defines the authority and responsibility of each entity, and then also system purpose, which is defined by agency missions, and those define the nature of organizations. Okay, system boundaries. Let's get into a little more detail. System boundaries, as we said, are defined by agency jurisdictions, which defines the authority and responsibility of each role. So when it comes down to it, this is what they should do and what they should not do. It's difficult to clearly delineate boundaries in the public sector, especially across layers of government. So one example of that situation would be sort of a government by proxy situation with the food stamp program. So the food stamp program is funded by the federal government, but it's administered by the state. And then there are other third parties involved with that as far as, just to keep it simple, there's food stamps are distributed on pay cards, like a sort of like a credit card situation. And so then there's a third party that administrates those cards as far as, making sure they're secure and someone can't hack in and steal balances, to make sure that, there's due diligence there, and working to try to make sure that that money is delivered to those people who need it to purchase food with. And it can make it a challenge with this, layers of government approach in this program. It can make it a challenge to hold the appropriate agency accountable when something goes wrong there. Also, system boundaries are needed to separate what is within the system and what is outside the system. And that's important so that we can determine what the system gets from and gives to the environment. And those transactions occur at the system's boundaries. Also, it's important to separate what is within the system and what is outside the system, because there are two requisites for the survival of a system. Number one, the system's capacity to manipulate or adapt to its environment, and number two, the system's capacity to suppress or moderate internal threats. So when I think of adapting to its environment, I think of, as new technologies are developed, a system may need to make major adjustments. Just a quick example that comes to mind is like the old movie rental system. Um, a long time ago, you used to have to, if you wanted to watch a movie and you didn't want to go to the theater, if it was a new movie, you'd have to go to a store where they would rent movies. You'd physically pick up a tape or a DVD and take it home and watch it. And so as Netflix emerged, that movie rental system failed to adapt. So the movie rental business died. Moving on to system purpose. System purpose, as we said, is defined by agency missions, which define the nature of organizations. So every system's purpose is to translate outputs to inputs. At minimum, the purpose is for the organization to survive, right? That's the more successful the organization, the longer it will survive. Um, System purpose is, if you're seeking to identify, a, if you're seeking identity by defining purpose, it's often difficult in practice, especially in government agencies, because purposes often multiply and conflict. And multiple poorly defined competing goals in government agencies can help leaders navigate political environments. So when you think about competing goals, for example, I know I've been in this situation too, where sometimes you have a role where everything seems like everything in your responsibility, in your scope of authority is deemed urgent, but no resources have been allocated to personnel to accomplish the throughputs. So perhaps the conflicting goals are to process all directives immediately and do so with no budget. So there's the conflict. I mean, how do you get everything done if there's only one person to process all the throughputs? There's this bottleneck situation created, and the throughput process will suffer for it. It will definitely slow down, and since it's not possible to complete all tasks simultaneously with equal priority when you only have one person processing them, and that just it's a conflict. You can't do everything urgently if you're only doing one thing at a time. So just a brief example of that. And so then we move on to challenges to systems theory, which we'll just briefly touch on here. You have the humanist challenge, the pluralist challenge, and the text goes into a little detail on the formal models of bureaucracy challenge, specifically in regards to systems theory. It says that theorists did not believe that the systems model produced enough insight. Instead, formal models theorists focus on economic considerations and networks of contracts. And then interwoven government is another challenge to systems theory. So in summary, just to recap, systems theory was developed as an alternative to the hierarchical theories of classical and bureaucratic. There are closed systems and open systems. An open system engages in a feedback loop that consists of inputs and throughputs and outputs, and that organizations learn from feedback and improve over time through this process. And systems theory also focuses on boundaries and purpose. Thank you for your time and good luck this semester.